Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charlotte Day. Welcome to this live webinar that is being organised as part of the Journalism Virtual Work Experience powered by SpringPod. Whether you've been with us for a while or you're just getting started, we do hope you are enjoying the programme. Don't forget, if you have any questions or you need any support from a member of our team, you can reach us using the green chat icon at the bottom right corner of the platform. We are here to help, so please don't hesitate. Before we begin, it's useful to know that this talk should last about 30 to 40 minutes. Don't forget to use the Q&A function to ask questions to your guests today. They would love to answer them and they are here to help, so definitely make the most of this time. Due to the number of questions that usually come through, though, we may not be able to answer every single one. So please use the upvote function if you spotted a question that you also wanted to ask. It's the little thumbs up underneath each question, and the most popular ones will rise to the top of the list. Those will be the ones that we ask. If you do miss this webinar or you need to leave halfway through for whatever reason, do not worry, as this is being recorded, and we always aim to have the recording available on our platform within 24 hours so you can come back and watch it on demand. In today's webinar, we are going to be talking about broadcast journalism, and joining us to do that is Theo Chikomba. Welcome. It is a pleasure to have you, Theo.
Thank you so much. What an introduction. I'm very, very happy to be here. I hope everyone is having a good half term, but I understand some of you have gone back to school already. So yeah, continue with the education, which is good. As mentioned, tonight we are going to be talking about broadcast journalism and specifically news, because that's what I do. And then just as you can see in front of you, that's me on the top right in the corner there. Interviewing the leader of Stevenage Borough Council, a lady called Sharon Taylor, which was quite a good interview actually. But that was the only shot I could find today, which I thought you can see right in front of me. You can see who I am. So hopefully that can give you a glimpse of who I am and what we'll be talking about today. So today, specifically on broadcast journalism news, broadcast journalism is mainly about TV and radio, but I'll explain more of that as we go on. And as mentioned, if you have any questions, please ask them. I'm not going to talk too much in my PowerPoint, but I'll make sure that I leave enough time to answer any of your questions that you have, and I'll try and do my best to answer them for you. So I thought it would be really useful to start this by giving you a timeline of my career and sort of where I am at today, just to give you my age. I'm 26, so hopefully this should give you an idea of how I sort of started and where I am today. So taking me all the way back to 2012, this is a time when I was at school and doing my A-levels, and I always knew I wanted to get into journalism. I'd been watching, I'm a massive Arsenal fan, so most of my weekends I spent with my dad watching Arsenal, and we'd be watching the guys on Sky Sports, or the guys on BBC, and thinking, yes, this is the way we can see what our team is up to when we don't go to the stadium. And over the years, I just got really interested, and I was like, oh, I'd really like to do that. And I love talking. I was always that child getting told off at school. Not all the time, but a few times getting told off for talking too much. Now I talk for a living, which is fantastic. Who knew that would have been so helpful? I'm joking. I would not advise you to talk when the teacher's talking, but obviously I'm just joking around. But yeah, so in 2012, I started community radio when I was at school. So that's a community station called CSR in Canterbury in Kent. And I'd been trying these guys for over a year. I was just messaging them, hey guys, can I come around and see what you guys do there? And yeah, I think a year later, someone eventually responded to me saying, oh, you can come down. There's one lady who would love to have you. And at the time, she was a university student, a lady called Anna. And she was really great. On the first day, I think I was about an hour into the program, and she was like, would you like to read the travel? And I was like, me? Read the travel? Are you serious? And I did that, and I was shaking like a leaf. And I got my parents to listen to it. And when I got home, I was like, oh my goodness, I've actually been on radio, which was amazing. Long story short, not too long after that, they ended up giving me a show because majority of the people from the community and the university students. So it meant during the summer, the university students would go, and there'll be so much free airtime for people to get involved. And that was the opportunity which I used to kind of start my own stuff, do interviews. I did so many interviews from like people in the local area, musicians, people doing charity work. And this was just my way to kind of get started and practice and do something I would want to do in the future. Although it's not as many listeners, but it was going around the whole of the Canterbury area. So lots of people who do tune into CSR. I ended up finding a lot of my friends and older family friends in the area. They were hearing me on the radio, but like, oh, I heard you on the radio the other day. And I was just like, oh my goodness. So that's where it sort of started for me there. And then we go into the next one. I went to Salford University in 2014. That was for an undergraduate degree in broadcast journalism. I sort of toyed around with, do I do like English literature? Do I do business management or economics or completely different degree? I ended up going with broadcast journalism because that's what I really wanted to focus on. But there is no wrong or right way to do this. Whilst I've been in the industry, lots of people have studied completely different courses. Although they knew they wanted to be a journalist, they used that degree to kind of help them open their mind in a specific subject and then come into broadcast journalism afterwards. So I wouldn't say you have to go and do broadcast journalism. You can even study medicine, you can do law, you can do whatever you want, but you do then have to do a postgraduate degree in broadcast journalism, for example, so that you can get those skills which you haven't picked up in your undergrad. And some people, during their time in those other courses, they'll do student radio, student newspaper, and that kind of thing. And that's one way you can start building your resume and your portfolio whilst you're studying. And then for me, moving on, I went to Goldsmiths University to do political communications for my master's. This was really an opportunity for me to delve into, some of the systems, political systems that work in the world. And it was really fascinating, opened my eyes up and gave me that opportunity to just study and study a bit furthermore after my journalism degree. So in 2017-18, just before I started my master's, I was fortunate to get a freelance role at BBC Radio 1 and 1 Extra. So this was working on daytime and evening shows with the likes of Greg James and those kind of people, Mr. Jams, Charlie Sloth. And it was like, oh my goodness, I'm surrounded by all these people I've been listening to since I was a kid. And I think what helped me in the interview, I've massively been, a massive listener of Radio 1 and 1 Extra, particularly since I was a young kid. And my dad, when he was dropping me at school, we listened to Radio 1, seeing what's happening and that kind of thing. So when it came to the interview, I was just citing all these things I'd been hearing for years. And that's what they said helped me to land that role. And it just opened so many doors for me. During that time, I was finishing my postgrad. And just before I finished my postgraduate degree in 2018, I applied for a job for Inside Out because remember, I knew I wanted to get into broadcast journalism. So for those who don't know what Inside Out is, it was a program on BBC One which comes on at 7:30. It comes on at 7:30 till 8 p.m. And sometimes 7 o'clock till 7:30 when the One show was not on. And this is a program where it's original journalism, so it's not news as such, where small teams go out and shoot various stories. And then you sort of have like 3 stories in about half an hour, which was really, really fascinating. So I joined as a researcher for a couple of months. We got to work on a panorama as well. And it was working with these really, really experienced journalists. And I sort of didn't have a clue what I was doing, but they let me do everything from editing to interviewing to basically just shadow as much as I could. And I was learning so much just as I was finishing my studying. That contract didn't last very long. It was about 4 months. Unfortunately, in that same newsroom, BBC South Today, which is the regional news in Southampton, covering the south of England, in the middle, bang there on the coast, like Portsmouth, Southampton area, they offered me a training contract, which traditionally is a journalism trainee scheme, which you can apply for on the BBC website around January time. And this was a good opportunity, 7-8 months, just learning absolutely everything about TV, news, radio, digital platforms and so on and so forth. And this was really like almost a baptism of fire because I almost wasn't shadowing. I was doing the job. I was put on the rota like everyone else, but obviously I had someone to help me just in case I've had any questions. But I learned so much about myself, what I wanted to do. And I always knew I wanted to be on air and to be a reporter. So what I did, I would set up stories, bring my own stories. And then one of the senior journalists would would take me out on the road with them, and I'd go out there with them, and I'd say, how about we do it like this, we do it like that, because after all, I'd organise the story, but I'd see how they do it, how they manage editing last minute, getting it on air, and that was just doing that for months and months and months and months. And then one day, I'd set up a story about footballers. As I mentioned earlier, I'm interested in football, and it was about injuries. And there was a young guy who'd been let go by Reading Football Club, and he had some injury problems. So I was like, how do we explore this story? So we went to a guy who he goes to get some physiotherapy. And that story I'd set up like over a few weeks, and I'd managed to get this ex-footballer and this professional. And I turned up just as I'd normally been doing for all the other stories. And the sports reporter at the time, he was like, "Do you want to do this?" And I was like, "Are you sure?" And he was like, "Yeah, go and do it." So I ended up doing the interviews with the camera crew and everything, and then I ended up editing the piece with the support of him and some others, and it ended up on the TV. And this was my very first TV report back in 2019, and I was like over the moon. I was not supposed to be doing it, but it happened, and the rest is history. So my training contract then finished, and I was fortunate enough to get a role at Radio Cambridgeshire for a couple of months. And midway in my contract, one of the people management came up to me and said, "Oh, can we go to this little room?" And I was thinking, what have I done? I haven't done anything wrong. When someone calls you going to this, there's this little room where it's basically a room you get told off. And I was thinking, I haven't done anything as far as I can imagine. And he was like, "Oh, well, the TV team, they know obviously you've done a trainee scheme looking at TV, and they just want someone to cover for like the next few months because someone else is going on an attachment, which is basically a couple of months in another team in London." And long story short, I'm still here. And that person's gone now. They never came back, basically. And yeah, I basically took on the role. I'm now a permanent member of staff. And I'm a reporter for BBC The Keist, and I also work for the BBC News Channel in London. So that's national news as well. So what is journalism? In terms of broadcast journalism, it's, as I say there, distributing reports, reporting on current affairs, current events, breaking news, and presenting information. And I always feel like when people ask, what is the purpose? So, for example, if there's been a crash on the M1, we'll say there's been a crash there on the M1, and we'll find out the specifics, whether there's been any deaths or anything like that. Just as an example, there's a hospital called Adam Brooks in Cambridge, and someone was sadly run over a couple of weeks ago. And we covered this, but we covered it initially saying, this is what's happened, but we'll be waiting for more details from the police, who are the authorities. And that's where we sort of left it, just to let people know that this has happened. And then we did an update recently about what happened in that incident. And that's just an example of presenting information. Now, you may remember Brexit. Lots of people in the news, in the media covered that, the general election. We get these opportunity to meet prime ministers or members of parliament and that kind of thing. So it's essentially bringing the audience to some of the most important stories of the day, whether it's politics, whether it's good news, whether it's events like COP26, which is happening right now. That is the role of a journalist, and I think we have to be good at that and be efficient and tell the best stories in the most accessible and friendly way. So, in terms of types of broadcast journalism, as I mentioned earlier, there's radio, television, and the internet. So that could be on the websites, and that can be told via documentaries, bulletins, or other factual programs during various times of the day. Now, if you really want to go into radio, absolutely do it. If you want to go into television, absolutely do it. If you want to do writing on the internet, or you wanted to make digital videos with your phone or cameras, or be a bit more creative with graphics and that kind of thing, absolutely go for it. There's no limit to what you can do. Fortunately, in my role, it's a bit of a hybrid. Although I work with television, what I tend to do is make stories. If it's a good story, it'll go on TV, online, on the radio, and make sure it goes to every platform across the BBC, whether that's regional or national or international news. So I try and do that on a weekly basis or day-to-day basis. Some stories are better for radio, for example, if you've got no pictures to tell that story. Some stories are amazing for television, and some are just better for an online audience. So it just depends on what the story is. So what makes a good journalist? I think this is really important because confidence, as I've written in the first one there, you really have to be confident in your ability to tell a story. I always tell people, if you want to become confident, first of all, start reading books. If you don't read books already, just read books and, you know, take all of that in, take it all in, how other writers, very good writers who've been published, are able to tell stories. And then that way you take that confidence when you're trying to tell, a story about anything at all. It could be, how do I describe, this is just one of my work phones. This phone, it's very small, it's hard to type on there. It's got one camera at the back, and it's quite old. All the phones now are like humongous. Maybe that's just a rubbish example, but if you're not confident in your ability to explain something, then just imagine someone at home who's spending their time to sit there and watch you give information, and you're not confident, or you're just not sure. But you have to look confident. Some people say fake it till you make it, but I don't know. Just be very, very confident in your ability to be a good broadcast journalist. Now, I'm sure you guys have seen the news. That's why you're here or you're thinking about it. But a lot of those people who are on the TV or on the news, they don't start off that confident. Some of them do. But for those who do have long careers, they're confident and they're able to tell those stories with the best of their abilities, and at least allow those at home to watch them. And, if you're confident, people are more likely to believe you. And then also the ability to discern between fact and fiction, which I think is actually quite important because there's a lot of stuff out there. So, for example, with COP26 now, we know with social media, someone can post something. For example, there was a video that was going around of someone who'd said something, but it was actually from like 5 years ago, and someone saying it's happening now. So this is where we as journalists, we are paid to spend that time to verify that and make sure that we are saying something that is factually correct. But sometimes things happen, especially in breaking news, because we have rolling news channels. Everyone wants to be the first person to get that piece of information out. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. A good example, I was watching the BBC News channel about 2 weeks ago, and there was unfortunately the murder of the MP in Essex, and they had put, there's been a stabbing, but they hadn't actually got the specific information about what had happened. And then about 10 minutes later, the caption had completely changed, saying there's been a stabbing at the constituency office, but it wasn't then clear at that point whether he'd been stabbed or it was someone else. So I think in those opportunities, we do have to just take a step back. Sometimes it's not being the first person to do it, but the first people to get it factually correct is always better. Otherwise, if a family member's watching at home and their relative is famous or well known, and then you put out the news that lots of something's happened when it actually hasn't happened. So it's always good to double check your facts. And that is exactly the next point about accurate in their reporting. I remember a very good example. When I was working in London a couple of years ago, someone had said there'd been a bomb found in the underground, and then all these people, and I think it was a celebrity who'd put this out. It must have been like Ollie Murs or something like that. And lots of people, had seen this online, and it turned out like it wasn't anything at all. So that's why, as journalists, we have to be accurate in our reporting. You don't always have to report just because someone big or someone has said this has happened, but always to verify those facts, especially with the police or people who are reputable. So, key skills. I think these are super important as a broadcast journalist specifically. As a confident communicator, which I've touched upon, being creative, this means that you have to think on your feet every single day. How do you tell the story in the most creative way? So it's using different camera angles or picking up sound to explain the story. There's a tendency, you want to be like a traditional reporter where you sort of explain what the story is, and then you plonk someone on the street and ask them a question. But if there's an opportunity to get them to do something or to explain what they're doing and just let them narrate the story themselves, that's always better than just feeding information. Sometimes it's about how do you tell that story in an interesting way. And then moving on, resilient. This is quite cutthroat sometimes when you're making daily news programs. Lots of people, in fact, everybody who's working, especially if they are, in demand to be on the news, if something is broken, they'll be busy, they'll be doing their job. And then us come along journalists and say, oh, we'd love to interview you for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But they're like, actually, I haven't got the time. And then they don't respond, and you sort of under pressure from your colleagues saying, you need to get this person on the TV at this time. A good example of this happened to me last week. The Chancellor's budget was on Wednesday, and I needed people to be available at 12:15 in the afternoon for an hour. So if someone's got work, how can they just take an hour off their time? And I called so many people. Fortunately, we did manage to get some people, but some of the people I really wanted didn't manage to get on because they had work. And this happens all the time. So you'd have to be someone who doesn't mind being knocked down sometimes. You're not always going to get a yes. Sometimes you get yeses every week, and then there's that one day it just doesn't work for you. And that happens to me a few times. And I just have to remind myself, you just got to be resilient. And then moving on, able to convince people to go on air. That's exactly what I was saying. I always feel like we are making programs for people. So we value their time, and we're not calling them just because we want them to fill up time on the TV. We want them because we value what they are saying. And a lot of people are so happy to do that as long as they've got the time. And I think it's about relaying that message, saying we really value your time. And I think you'd be super great in this story, whatever the story is. And then moving on, great storyteller, which I've already been through already. There's so many different ways to tell stories, but just think of it in an engaging way. In the same way as you watch movies, there's always sort of a storyline. I know some budget movies are not great, but the movies that win awards, they're telling a great story. So it's the same way in news, because some of the times you're not on air for very long. So you have to be able to tell a story in a short amount of time and allow people to take the information they need from that. And then just finally, knowledge of media law. So this applies especially if you don't do a broadcast journalism degree. You will need to get training or do the exams for media law, because there's so many occasions, where things pop up. Just a quick example, like a lot of photos or still images that someone else has taken, we need to credit them. And sometimes people, they'll be like, you using my pictures and you haven't asked me, and you end up in court because you're having to pay for using someone's property without their permission. Or, for example, you're supposed to keep like under 18s anonymous, especially if they're in court. They're going through the court process. And if you give too many details, which we then call jigsaw identification, someone can put the pieces together and make out who that person is. You can end up in court, and people have done, because they've just not had the correct adequate training in media law. So there's so many aspects of media law. I have a book somewhere here, and it's like this thick, and there's so many different examples of what you can cover, when you can cover it, and how you should cover it. And that will get you in so many, will get you out of so many difficult moments if you know media law. But they're all obviously colleagues to help you, and most of the time it won't go on air unless it's been checked. Just a quick example, I did a story on the increase of domestic abuse cases, and I interviewed a lady a couple of weeks ago, and she was speaking about her story. And I then had to get this legaled by lawyers, duty lawyers in the BBC, to watch this to see if they're happy, because the ex-partner wasn't in prison. He's out and about. So you want to make sure that you're not necessarily taking one person's side, although it's a difficult situation that she was in. But it's just the way that you word it, and there's always support for that. But it's good to have, a grasp of media law in all the different circumstances you end up in. So, roles in a newsroom. So these are just some of the roles on the screen, and you can go for whatever you feel like you're most suited for. So, for example, scriptwriter, producer, reporter. There's two types of editors. So there's a person who's in charge editorially, so that's the manager, or editor, someone who edits the pictures, presenter, reporter, pundit or commentator, or meteorologist if you are happy to tell the weather. I don't know how weather presenters do it. They do it with no script for about a minute and a half, and they'll tell you what's going on in your entire region or the whole country. Very smooth. So those people are good communicators, and they're able to tell us the weather seamlessly every single day. I don't know how they do it, but I definitely can't do that. So yeah, these are some of the roles. There are others as well, but these are just some of the main roles that you can get into. So specialist subjects. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't want to go down the route of doing broadcast journalism as a degree or as an apprenticeship, you can specialize in almost anything these days. So if you've got a background in arts or business, social media, entertainment, medicine, legal science, technology, music, you name it, there's reporters and there's teams for those roles and more within the BBC. And so it doesn't necessarily mean you have to, talk about death and destruction at the top of the program or politics. There are so many other specialisms which don't involve those. So if you're not one of those kind of people, don't feel like, oh, because I'm not a serious person and I don't want to cover the top story, I can't be a broadcast journalist. No, it does. Don't let that stop you at all. You can absolutely do anything that you want. There's almost a team for everything. There's even new roles that have started this year for gaming. So people who are massively into gaming, there's a team for that in BBC News. So yeah, these are just some of the few examples. And if you have any questions on those, feel free to ask them. So what is my typical day? It mainly depends on planning ahead, or I could be covering breaking news, working in production. So for example, in the late shifts we have for the news at 10 o'clock, it's a bit of making sure that everything is correct. And if there's breaking news, I'll end up going out or get live on the camera. So a bit of production, reporting out on the road. So I spend most of my time in my car driving to X, Y, and Z and then putting the piece together for TV, radio, or online. Outside broadcasts, so it could be lives, and then a bit of presenting as well. So my day varies. That's the thing I love about this job. No day is the same. And if you have a very good relationship with your boss or editor, just tell them what it is that you want to do in the future and they'll try and accommodate that. It depends on the team, but if you're clear about that from the beginning, I'm sure you can get a good deal for you to make sure that you do what aligns with your skills and what you want to do in the future. So these are just a few examples of stories which I mentioned about TV, online, and radio. So at the top left, you've got a story about coronavirus. So I did this about IVF specifically. I did this during the pandemic. And this was about a couple who had been going through the IVF process and then everything shut, everything closed. So this was an opportunity when everything reopened again and they were able to go through that process and they were going to be having a child. So it was a good news story. So I did this for TV and I did this for our news website as well. This version was mainly them looking down the lens and they got very emotional and everything. So it was like almost them telling their own stories. Remember what I was saying earlier about telling a story in a creative or different way? And this is just one of those stories which just touches your heart, especially for people who've been in this situation. They'll be like, okay, I can totally relate to this. And it probably wouldn't have had the same effect with me just talking over it. So that was a good example of how we used that. And then this one on the far right, St. Ives open water swimming. I took this picture on my phone and I did the piece for TV and for radio as well. So this is about sewage water going into rivers. And this group in particular, they go out swimming in the rivers a couple of times a week. And they say it's for their mental health, getting out and about, doing something because they've got really fast-paced jobs in the NHS, in academia, and so on and so forth. And this is a great example of doing a story on all platforms. I'd love to show you all, but because of time. And then on the bottom left, this is one of the biggest stories in the East region earlier on this year. So a proposal for a train line running all the way from Oxford to Cambridge, going through loads of villages. So there's people who have lived in their house for 20 years, or people who've lived in their house for a year, and they've been told that their house is going to be knocked down for a train line. And this was a digital video I made to go out on TV and also on the website, which got so many views. And it was a really good way of explaining a story in a completely different way, with lots of different graphics for people who weren't clued up about what was happening at the time. And it was just informative, quick, and quite snappy. And then on the bottom right, this is probably my biggest story, which I did last week. So this was about this cockerel, if you can just see in the middle. It was being handed back to people from Nigeria. It was taken in the 1800s, in 1897 specifically, during an expedition. And this was an item which has spiritual and cultural significance to the people in southern Nigeria. And it was taken over to the UK. It was basically looted or stolen, in other words. And this was the ceremony of it being handed back at Jesus College at the University of Cambridge. And this story went out on Look East, it went out on Focus on Africa, and it went out on TV in America. And then I did something for the website and virtually every BBC radio news bulletin that exists. So this is a great example of why the BBC is great. I'm trying to be BBC, but at other organizations, you might get one story you've done on TV online and it might make the radio, or some other broadcasters don't have the radio. But for this one specifically, it went out on so many different platforms, and I was doing what we call radio two-way, so speaking to a presenter in the studio, and I was just telling them what I'm up to. This was in the middle of the day, and this story managed to go out on so many different platforms. And yeah, it was just a really interesting story, and understanding and telling people why this matters. I remember someone said to me, that's only a statue, but it's not that. It's the cultural significance of what this means to those people it belonged to. So how do you get started? There's so many different ways these days. You have access to almost, as I was saying, we go back to the phone. This thing can open so many doors for you now with social media, blogging, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Those are just some platforms you can use to start, telling your own stories, talk about what's happening in your own area, or explaining something that, older people or even young people your age don't really understand. So it could be as small as, I don't know, people are always saying your area is really boring, but it's not. And there's something very interesting there. So you can go out there and film it on your phone, take a few pictures, or you can blog about it, write about it, do creative stuff on TikTok or Instagram Reels. The opportunities are endless. So don't feel like you have to wait till you get onto a degree or you have to go through the traditional process or an apprenticeship. You can almost start doing your portfolio now. These are some of the things I didn't have when I was in 2011, 2010. I don't know, TikTok didn't exist back then, as far as I can remember anyway. But we had Facebook and that kind of thing. But these things have evolved over the years. So don't wait until that opportunity. Start now, be creative, experiment, do it whilst you don't have so much pressure on you. I think for me now is a bit different because I'm expected to polish something up for a huge audience, potentially millions of people. So, sometimes experimenting doesn't work, but on some days it does. So absolutely do it. And then when you get to my position, you're like, what? I'm a natural at this. And I know people who get hired purely because they are so big on these platforms already and doing things that other people aren't thinking about. So be yourself. Don't feel like you have to be, the person who you see on the top story on BBC News on radio. Just be yourself and, carve out your own career, basically. So how to progress? I've probably spoken about these already. So you can go for a university degree. I'd highly recommend broadcast journalism purely because you get those skills, you do the exams, and you learn about the fundamentals of what it means to be a broadcast journalism. And you can network whilst you're doing it. They give you so many opportunities, work experience, and so on and so forth. That's what helped me to get that first job because I'd been going on work experience every holiday throughout my undergrad and postgrad degree. And it landed me a job when most people are still bashing out, long letters to get a job. So I'd say start now. Hence why I said you've got all these opportunities literally on your phone or on your computers. If you've got access to the internet, you're one step better than I was like 10 years ago, let's say. Or you can go for an apprenticeship. This is a good opportunity in the BBC, Sky News, ITV do it as well. And this is just, you're almost doing the job straight away. You don't have to go to university. And you'll do those exams as well. You get the professional qualifications, and you can get a job in about 2 years. The only difference I would say between an apprenticeship and university degree is when it comes to specialisms. So, for example, someone who studied a course to do with the environment or has gone on to do a postgrad, something to do with the environment, they can then work in a science unit and become an environmental specialist quicker than someone who's done an apprenticeship. So that's not to say you can't do that as well, but it does become quite competitive when you start to apply for more senior roles. But you can always do an apprenticeship and build up that way. But I'm just saying sometimes that's what might happen. They may favor someone who's done a degree, and that's just what the bosses want. And it's quite difficult for someone who's not done that, but versus someone who's spent years crafting and learning about that specific specialism. So, and then you can also get qualifications, professional qualifications outside of both of these areas. It's a bit expensive. There's a couple £1,000, and you go to like a special NCTJ course supported by like a local newspaper, or you can do BJTC accreditation, which is for broadcast journalists. I would recommend, if you're going to look for a course, look for something with BJTC and NCTJ. Those make you more employable, well, look better on your CV. If you want to go into broadcast journalism, which is what we'll talk about today, I'd highly recommend looking at BJTC purely because that is for broadcast journalism, and NCTJ is more for newspapers and print. And then obviously practical work, which is what I've mentioned earlier, work experience like you're doing this week. So you're already ahead. Keep up. So set goals and aim high. I always feel like, sometimes you tell people I want to do this and they're like, oh, that's probably impossible. Don't listen to them. I'm here to tell you whatever you want to achieve in your career, you can absolutely do it by setting small achievable goals. That could be making one video, writing one blog post, which your mum's going to read. I remember I used to do that, and probably a couple of my friends would read it. And that's just one way to start, and it helped me with my portfolio when I was applying for university. Have long-term goals. If you want to be a reporter, if you want to be a presenter, work on radio programs or documentaries, write that down. I'd say write these things down and just pin them up in your room somewhere so you don't forget them and keep looking for them. And then finally, seek mentors. So that's someone who's a couple of years ahead of you or someone who's 20 years ahead of you, and take, some of those experiences from them, ask them questions, how they got to where they are, and, get some of those little nuggets which might be helpful for where you are as well. But I'll definitely say, don't take everything they say and take it for yourself, because things change every single year and opportunities come up. Like for now, social media jobs and news are popping up. They weren't like that like 5-6 years ago. So there are so many new opportunities which you have the power to get involved in. So yeah, seek mentors, but also try and carve out your own career and do what you find interesting. There's nothing worse waking up every morning and doing something you don't enjoy. So highly recommend that as well. So we're getting to the end of this. This is just an interesting one. Is broadcast journalism, broadcast news under threat? Well, at the moment, new platforms are starting. People are using like Telegram and all these things to share, whatever's happening and things they're interested in. There are other ways to find out news. You can scroll on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter to find out what's happening instead of watching a traditional bulletin on the TV. There's some people who have less trust in traditional media. This tends to happen, especially when there's political things happening like general elections. People feel that, their side isn't being accounted for, but it's quite difficult because, you have to put all the different sides and you have to do it within a period of time. So someone who might watch 5 minutes doesn't need the other 5 minutes where this balance is happening. And then also polarization, which is the division of two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or belief. And we see that now with lots of people being very open about their thoughts and feelings, about anything at all, and it's causing divides online and in real life. For example, we've seen this year with people getting jabs, coronavirus this year, and some people are not talking to other people because they've not been vaccinated. So it's just not small things. It's just things like that and more, which are a threat to journalism because people feel that you keep covering this, but we're not interested in this. Why are you forcing this down our throats? So at the same time, we have to bring on experts who can explain to people why it's important and why they should consider it. But at the end of the day, it's to help them make an informed decision. And if they don't want to do it, we're only the arbiters of information. Why it's important, as I say, it's an opportunity for us to give factual information, provide information for people to make informed decisions about their lives. So that's whether traveling on the green, red, or amber list, which is now gone, or taking a COVID test, or or anything in relation to whatever's important in your life, whether it's getting a house, buying which car, which electric car, why you shouldn't get an electric car, or what are the problems at the moment with that industry, so much more, which is why I think as broadcast journalists, we have such a huge opportunity right now when lots of people are trying to make decisions about all sorts of things which are important in their life. So how far can you go? This is the very last one, I promise. I found a really good quote by John C. Maxwell, who's an American author. He says, successful and unsuccessful people do not vary greatly in their abilities, which is why I mentioned some of those things earlier. You can almost do them now, but they vary in their desires to reach their potential. And maybe for some people, you'll go away today and think, I don't know which one I want to do. Which thing shall I start with first? Try any of them. If they don't work, experiment. But for those people who do go far in their careers, they're the ones who tend to stick at it and don't give up if the first thing doesn't work. There's so many things in my career which don't work, or stories that fall through all the time, but don't give up. And honestly, I would say the same to you. Don't give up if you feel like it's impossible, or you don't see people who look like you or sound like you. But honestly, this is your career. Carve that out and you'll definitely achieve all that you want to do. And that is the end of my slideshow.
Thank you so much. That was really, really informative. Right, we've only got a few minutes for questions, so I will jump straight into them. Let's pick a few from here. What are the benefits of broadcast journalism compared to other types of journalism?
So I sort of touched it in my talk, and I would say it's pictures, so you can actually see it compared to radio. So on radio, you can only hear it, and someone has to really explain it to you in a way that you can understand if you're not there. So that's through sound or actually describing what's there. And in newspapers, you can write so much without the need for pictures. And it's great, you can analyze, and there's a space for that. But I think with television, with broadcast news on TV and radio, is giving you a different experience, and almost an experience that we can bring you into that. For an example, I went to meet some Team GB athletes a couple of months ago before they went to Tokyo. And online, you could have written, these people are going to Tokyo. But on TV, we actually went there and you got to see them. And that's just offering you a different experience and sharing those stories and things that are happening around our world in a completely different way.
Yeah, very true, very right. This is an interesting one, and it perhaps is completely dependent on each individual. But how mentally challenging is a job in broadcast journalism? Sorry, I've just asked you that one. I'm so sorry. I've completely lost my question. It was, how mentally challenging is a job in broadcast journalism in general?
So it's difficult to answer that because every person's different.
Yeah.
Some people really struggle with working under pressure, and some people are absolutely fine with it.
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example. Just last week, Friday, I was doing the top story on the sewage story, which I put in the PowerPoint. And I was working with a picture editor, quite a young guy, he's a bit younger than me. And we were told by the producer at 5:30, an hour before, saying, I want to completely restructure the story. And I was like, what? And we sort of looked at each other. We were like, we've been working on this for like 2 hours, and yeah. So I'm a person who doesn't sort of scream out and say, "Oh my goodness, no, I can't do this." I always tell myself I can do it no matter what, and I've got to this stage, and I've never missed or a deadline in news. And I said, okay, I'm going to start rewriting my script, and I rewrote it within less than 10 minutes. Went into the recording booth, and I went back, and we managed to put it together, and the producer was happy with that within about 20 minutes. And most people would look at the time, other people would be like, oh my goodness, it's 5:30, there's absolutely no chance this is going to happen. And this happened last year with a colleague who, found it quite difficult because it was very late in the day, and they were just like, I can't do this, I can't do this. And I was like, yes, we can do it. Sometimes you just have to tell yourself, yes, we can do it. Because if you tell yourself you can't do it, nothing will be done. But it's about balancing that. And everyone's very different. So I'd say it is challenging. But if you know yourself, at least know your team and figure out ways that can help you to do it, so that you don't miss those deadlines. So I can't give a specific answer because everyone's so different. But I work in a completely different way than others would, for example.
You've got to be quite adaptable. Would you say that was true, especially in sort of journalism, whether it's TV or radio? All of a sudden something changes, as with your story. You haven't got time to think about it, you've just got to do it. So would you say being adaptable and not being too rigid and set in your ways would be a skill that the student should learn or have?
Yeah, definitely. Almost like you're a chameleon. You're changing to whatever is happening. A great example of this last year, I was out filming some cars, like the ones that drive themselves at Cranfield University. And this was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Finished interviewing with the guy from Nissan, which was great. We got to see this cool car which drives itself. And I was like, cool, I'm sorted. It's 5 o'clock. I can go back home. And then I get a call saying the first bus of these people who've come from like Asia are coming to quarantine in Milton Keynes. This is the first bus in the UK. And I just happened to be the only person in the BBC with my cameraman near there. And they're like, you need to go there right now because you're going to be live on TV in about an hour. And I was just like, and on the way to the location, I had to interview an MP. And I was just like, I don't even know what's happening. Yeah, so you do have to be able to adapt. And what's really important, I think, is to keep an eye out on what's on the news when you have a moment. Like, people always ask me, do you know what's in the news? Like, a lot of my friends who don't work in news, like, do you know every story? And I'm just like, no, I simply don't. But when you have that bit of downtime, just keep an eye out on some of the main things that are happening. And that can be massively helpful when situations like that come up.
Okay, we've got time for one last question. How do you become more comfortable with speaking in front of the camera? Would you say that it was just practice makes perfect, or do you have any techniques and skills that they can practice?
This is a difficult one. I'd say just be yourself. And I say this to people all the time, and it goes over people's head. There's no magic to this. And it's not a case of you have it or you don't. Okay, there are some people who are completely nervous and they can't speak when the camera's on. But if you want to overcome that, I would say just like when I meet really nervous people, I say, imagine you're speaking to your mum. Like, forget the cameras there. Just tell me what it is you're doing or what the story is in a very normal way. I think, and take out the jargon words like out of your head. If you're trying to explain something in really complicated words, sometimes that's what makes people trip over. So for an example, I could just say, you know what, football this weekend was crazy because Tottenham lost and Manchester United won after a really difficult week last week. But if you're trying to overthink it and start trying to remember the footballers' names who scored, and then you start confusing yourself. And yeah, so basically the best way to do it is just imagine you're just having a conversation with someone. So that applies when you're doing lives on TV. So for example, now I can't see any of you, but I know I'm talking to people, so I'm looking directly into my camera and using words that engage people and directly speaking to whoever is watching this. And that is the best way to approach it. There's no magical way to do it, but just imagine there's no camera, although that's very difficult to do, but that is literally the only way.
Yeah,
And
no, it's
yeah,
so true. A presenter once told me that when she presents, she will look down the camera, and her father told her when she first started out, imagine the camera is my face and you are only talking to me. And 60 years in the business, she still does the exact same thing of staring down the camera as if she's talking to her father. So you forget that it's a camera and there's lots of people watching you. So it's very similar to what you were just saying of imagine the camera's not there, or imagine, you know, the camera's a friend.
yeah, exactly. And the same thing when you go on radio. Like, don't think about how many people are watching, because I promise, if I thought about, okay, there's going to be like 10 million people watching this, I would probably get nervous. But you don't think that at all, and I don't think that at all anymore. I just do my job, and I know that, you know, someone is watching. Well, someone's definitely watching, and just do the best you can. And if you come across quite clearly, quite confident, it will take time. I wasn't as confident as I am now 2 years ago, but because I do it all the time, practice does make almost perfect. I'm not perfect, but it does help.
It definitely does. Thank you so much. I can't believe we have to end it there. We've gone way over time, but you were absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for bringing so much passion and excitement to the webinar. It's completely infectious. I know I can feel it, so I know that our students can feel it as well. And yeah, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. It's really, really appreciated, Theo.
Pleasure as always.
Just a reminder to all of our students, don't forget to get all your work submitted and get the programme completed by the 12th of November to be eligible for your certificate. You can find all the important dates if you need reminding in Module 1. Good luck with the rest of the programme, and we'll see you very soon.